G'day guys and welcome, my name's Michael and I am the Dead Aussie Gamer, here to share with you my tips, tricks, ideas and strategies for playing and running tabletop role-playing games. Today's video we're going to be discussing humour in roleplay. What sort of jokes do we tell, what kind of entertainment do we find when we sit at a role-playing game, and of course how does humour play into it? Are we playing in a campaign which is set in a comedy kind of genre, or are we just simply the kind of people to sort of just have a bit of fun no matter what kind of game we're playing? There are lots of different places where humor lies, and lots of different ways where it's both acceptable and kind of unacceptable to use certain types of humor. Today we're going to be going over just some of the stuff that I've experienced over time, and yeah, just kind of go over, how they play at a role-playing game. The first one I want to talk about is meta jokes. Now, meta jokes are a very common one. They're jokes that don't necessarily pertain to the game or the scenario that is happening currently. For example, you have a group of heroes who walk through a large and abandoned graveyard. As one of the characters walks, up to a particular door, the rogue steps forward with his lockpick in hand, and then one of the characters says, "Whoa, hang on a second. Are we sure we're going to let Daniel lockpick? I mean, every time he's done it so far, he's failed and set off this trap." And that could cause a little bit of a chuckle, a little bit of fun. That could be an ongoing thing that Daniel never, ever gets any of these traps done, which could, become a meta joke. It's something outside of the campaign that's influencing the humor here. Another good example is ongoing villains or recurring themes, such as watching a particular bad guy constantly break your weapon. I have a character, for example, who I, sadly lost a lot of weapons to, the Night Walkers, who tend to break all of my very expensive and lovely weapons, and I have a personal hatred of them. So naturally, whenever a Night Walker shows up, we begin the meta jokes about how I'm inevitably going to lose my weapon, be sad, take my cricket bat, and go home. These are meta jokes, and they're designed to just have fun as players. They're great because what they can allow you to do is they allow you to sort of interconnect the social scenario of you and your players having a good time, A role-playing game isn't all about staying in character the whole session, getting into a deep delve of character immersion, and the meta jokes allow you to break that pace a little bit and just remind yourselves to have a bit of fun. This being said, too many meta jokes can kind of make it hard for a game master to really get into the swing of things, especially if they're using a particular genre, such as horror or that kind of thriller. Imagine going into a horror scene where you're talking about zombies, where your GM is trying to kind of build up this kind of awesome atmosphere about oppressive violence from these zombies, and you're busy making references to, Dead Rising, for example, the video game. Hey, let's go get a bucket and put one on one of these zombies' heads. Meta jokes, they're good for what they are, but in obviously certain conditions, not necessarily as frequently as you would use other jokes, for example. The second type is roleplay humor. Now, this one is very hard to come by, but it is hilarious if you can get it done. It is where your characters in-game perform an act of comedy. They joke, they do something funny, they say something funny. In a very similar way that the meta jokes work, the roleplay characters can also tell similar jokes. They can have those experiences where instead of saying Daniel is always messing up with disarming traps and checking doors, the character Elias is always doing this, and having your character make a joke about that. That way the characters are laughing as well as the players are laughing. You get more for your buck with, I think, roleplay humor than you do with meta joke humor, and it does keep the essence in the game. Probably the best way that I can explain to use roleplay humor is if you have a joke, if you've got something in mind that's really funny, find a way for your character to understand that joke and interpret it in your game world. I had a character in one of my campaigns who basically traded information for jokes, and that was part of the huge, joy of his character, is he lived in a very dark and dreary and gothic society. He was an undertaker, so all he did was bury people all day. And in order to kind of, get through the humdrum of his life, he sought out jokes. And anyone who would bring him jokes, he would give information about who had died, how they died, what state the body was in, who paid for their burial. Lots of very important things when you were investigating the dead. So people came up with dark humor jokes, and they would convert them into something relevant. One of my favorite ones at the moment came from one of the dark humor websites, which went something like this. A man rushes into his garden and he digs up a winning lotto ticket. As he does so, he excitedly runs back into his home to tell his wife. Then he stops. He remembered why he was digging a hole in the garden. Now that's funny. I like that joke. That was really cute. But obviously, lotto ticket's not appropriate. So they changed it. A man goes into his courtyard and with shovel digs and digs and digs and finds a chest of gold. He looks at the gold and smiles. He rushes in to tell his good wife. Then he remembers why he was digging the hole in his courtyard. You know, just those little tiny changes, you can still keep the sense of humor without necessarily, taking it out of the roleplay. So, yeah, those are fun. And if you can do them, all the better. The third type of humor is satire and parody. Now, satire and parody is very similar to meta-humor as it is designed to make the players laugh. They are things that usually reflect or mimic aspects of other elements. These could be other characters. These could be personalities in real life. For example, I get quite often asked, because, I do voice acting and stuff like that, to play parodical characters. So it's like, hey, I want to see Robin Williams in this character, or I want to see you play like this typical Wild West Texan kind of character. These are satire and parodical characters, which are fun and they are entertaining. The only thing you need to be careful of is that satire and parody don't become gimmick. If you have a character that is built or designed around satire or parody, make sure that it's not their only element. I remember a long time ago, I had an encounter with a character played by a very good role player who played a character called the Cat in the Hat. Now, this was based around the time that the Cat in the Hat meme was going around, and there were just so many of these memes going about. And he played literally a catfolk wearing a hat who went around beating people with a bat. And that was it. There was nothing else to the character. There was nothing else that sort of really connected to him. And once he made that joke once, that was it. That was all that was to the humor. We laughed, we chuckled when he showed up, but then it was just the same thing over and over and over again, and by that point he had a very hollow character. So if you're playing with a satirical or parodical character, make sure there's more to them. If you are taking actions which are satirical or parodical, like for example, let's say that you are playing a character who is creating a scenario that is based off, like let's say it's an infiltration, that's the word. Say it's an infiltration of a castle, and your character walks up and is dressed in drag and plays up the whole female kind of, hey big boy, what's a nice guard like you doing in a place like this? Big beard, kind of wearing a really cheap wig. Now this is a satire this is a parody, should I say. This is a parody of, these kind of cross-dressing 1980s kind of infiltration humor kind of comedy things where the guard is distracted by the rather ugly woman. But then the ugly woman turns out to be right up the guard's alley. And so there's now this sort of awkward flirtation thing happening. This parodical scene is funny and it's great and it's awesome because everyone's involved. Yeah? So moments like that are important because if you're doing a parody and stuff, the more that the others get into it, the GM included, the funnier it becomes. And it becomes such a memorable moment too, especially if you lean into it. So GMs, don't shy away from it. Lean into it and try and encourage your players to take part as well. Now, the last little thing I want to talk about is sarcasm. Now, I'm Australian, and we speak fluent English and fluent sarcasm. That's just how we are. We've always been that way. So, for us, it's very important to understand where the line is drawn. At what point should we be sarcastic? At what point do we not? I'm sure many of you have heard this before. I kick him in the face. Nah, just kidding. Ha ha ha. Yeah. Just, or, someone's done something or said something inappropriate and they've just laughed it off as no, I didn't really mean to do that. This is, next to the meta jokes, probably the most common type of joking that happens at a game table. And it's okay in small doses. As a GM, and I'm sure many GMs out there felt the same way, it is a little frustrating when the same player or players continually use sarcasm as a sense of humor. Yeah, it's really funny to talk about the inappropriateness of someone doing something, but it's almost like it's almost like someone slamming the brakes on the pace of your game. When you sort of start to build momentum and someone throws out sarcasm, you always, whether or not you want to or not, stop to react to that, and then you stop when you realize, no, I'm just kidding, I'm not doing that. Which kind of, I don't know, for me at least, it grinds after a while. So the only thing I can recommend in terms of sarcasm is if you're using sarcasm, again, doing it in roleplay is way better than doing it as a meta thing. And of course, if you are being sarcastic and the design is to try and make people laugh, again, make sure that everyone's in on it. Don't sort of be sarcastic, look around and realize that you're the only person laughing. It can be very tricky, it can be very hard, and it can, it can ruin some GM's mood, absolutely. So these are the four main ones that I think you will come across. So going over them really quickly, the meta joke, which is jokes made using references that only we as players can understand and the characters can't. The roleplay humor, which is where our characters tell jokes or do something humorous within the game. Even slipping on a banana peel is funny, all types of humor. Satire Parody, where we are referencing something in the meta, but using it in the roleplay. Whether or not it's to, sort of reflect a sense of humor based in something we understand, or if it's simply to mimic and mock something. Again, both are really funny. Both kind of need a delicate hand in order to not become tactless and gimmicky. Lastly, sarcasm is, of course, the smart aleck, the person who sort of throws out something to make people laugh, but not really. So it's kind of metagaming disguised as roleplay humor. As a GM, all of these elements are part of one important thing: your players' fun, your players' joy. If your players are having fun with meta jokes, do meta jokes. If your players are having fun with the roleplay humor, lean into it and do that. Find where your line is drawn based on what your players want, and you will be happy, Sometimes we as GMs, however, can't put up with things. And I know, like I said, sarcasm is one of the big ones for me that I have trouble putting up with. I have one particular player who I hope watches my videos, I don't know, maybe they don't, who has sarcasm is almost every second or third line. Any attempt to roleplay is usually followed with some level of sarcasm, a chuckle, and then everyone ignoring them and moving on. It's hard, to sort of put yourself behind that and allow that humor to happen. But if you can do that, then, your table will love you for it. Plus, it also proves how strong you are in terms of that. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, after we've sort of talked about what you might experience, is what you as a GM can do with humor. Now, comedy is a great tool. It's not only a great way to entertain, it's a great way to be able to set a right mood or a right pace. I use humor in order to accent moments of drama in my roleplay. So if I'm setting up let's say an invasion of a keep, and the group is playing people who, sort of are currently living, residing, or working in that keep, I might use a couple of small side questy humorous encounters to set the mood, to make everyone feel like they're safe, it's fun here, it's awesome, it's entertaining, before I then hit them with something dramatic. They could be over at a small merchant, and they say, okay, cool. So this merchant's having trouble selling his wares. What does he sell? He sells vegetables. What kind of vegetables? Well, you're not a farmer yourself, but you can tell these vegetables are these, kind of green, circular kind of ones. They look like lettuce, but they're not quite. And then have my entire table wrap up, they're cabbages! And then I go, all of a sudden, you hear the sound of a huge boulder crashing into the side of the keep. Bricks fall from the ceiling and land, crushing this cart covered in cabbages. The old man grabs his head. My cabbages! Everyone is laughing, but at the same time, they're like, It creates a sense of confusion, befuddlement, And that's exactly the moment I want. That's the feel I want to give when I do that, you know? So humor can be used in order to accent other moments, more dramatic moments, by making the players feel at ease, feeling comfortable, and then obviously finding a good way to break, disrupt, or bend that comfort into your next dramatic scene. So there you go. So that is how I find humor in role playing. That is how I wield it as a GM. I hope this video has been useful for you, and if indeed you want to see more about how I use humor in role play, I am actually going to be starting a new series coming up this Saturday, the 29th, from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. GMT plus 8, so that's us Aussie times. If you want to tune in, I think it's late night for the folks in the US, and as well, I think it might be midday-ish for the folks in the UK. If you want to come and check us out, please do. The show is called Minion Quest, a story which is actually an interesting one because we are taking a RPG comedy stance. So it's not really your typical, kind of old school adventure with heroes and people like that. We are looking at a whole group of monsters who set out into the world in order to try and make a name for themselves in a world which doesn't quite understand how monsters really fit into it. So yes, if you want to check it out, it is called here we go, Minion Quest. So yeah, check it out this week, and tell me a little bit about the sense of humor that you think from the show. Tell me about the sense of humor that you like to use, and for me, of course, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Go check us out on all our social medias. You can find the link in the description below. Sign up to us on Twitch if you want to check out Minion Quest. Until next time, guys, as always, from me to you, game hard or die trying. Bye, guys!